Alright, what is going on? Welcome back to another stream. Sorry the upload was late because I don't have that many viewers, but for the ones it was uploaded yesterday. So hopefully I'll be more consistent with my uploads. But anyway, we reacted to MrBallen. I actually don't know. Actually, I'm not gonna check again. It just uses up time. But yeah, we're just gonna react to MrBallen today. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Oh, actually, I have those subscribe buttons. Subscribe. Wait, subscribe if you're new.
I read a lot of scary stories, but today's top story legitimately freaked me out. But before I get into
that's how you know. That's how you know it's scary. That's how you know. If it freaks him out, that's how you know.
If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come out to dinner with you to a very fancy restaurant.
Ooh, that's
order
nice.
a ton of food, wolf it down, and before the check arrives, say you need to go to the bathroom, but just leave the restaurant. Also, please subscribe.
Oh, that's diabolical. That's diabolical, that is.
So you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Intro is such a vibe. Dig. Okay.
In 1982, a very outdoorsy teenage girl and boy who had recently started dating decided to go camping.
This is already off to a bad start. When you hear that, you know it's bad.
The girl wakes up because she has to go to the bathroom, and she's about to unzip her tent when she stops because she hears some strange noises coming from outside their tent. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded distinctly like something was digging in the ground. But she really had to
that's
go,
the name of the story.
She figured, you know what, it's probably just some small animal or something. And so she begins to unzip the tent. And there's a little bit of moonlight that night, and there was a clearing outside of their tent. So the moonlight's pouring through, so she has plenty of illumination. And so she looks through this tiny hole, and she can't believe what she sees. It is a grown woman squatting down about 2 or 3 feet away from their tent. Her back is to them, so she can't see that she's looking through the tent. And she's feverishly digging into the ground in front of her. The girl literally falls backwards into her tent.
Trying to bury herself alive.
By what she sees, and she lands on her boyfriend, who immediately gets up, and he's like, "What's going on?" And she goes, "Shh," and she points at the little hole where she had unzipped the tent, and she goes, "Look." The boy is confused, but he can tell his girlfriend is very serious. So he sits up quietly and he looks through the little opening in the door and he sees the digging woman. The boy recoils and looks at his girlfriend and he's like, "What is going on?"
Gotta get the old BB
he takes a
gun out.
And she's telling him, "Don't do it." And he opens up the tent a little bit more and he aims his flashlight directly on this woman. And this gets her attention and she stops digging and she stands up slowly and she turns around and faces them and she's got no expression. She's not giving them any indication why she's there. She's not acting aggressive. She's not acting scared. She's just completely neutral. And she stands there staring at them for quite a while before turning around and just walking away from their campsite. And after a little while, when they were pretty certain she was gone, they open their tent all the way, they go outside, they kind of scan around with their flashlights and she's nowhere to be found, and they go to where she was digging, and it's just this weird 4-inch deep hole in the ground. There's no rhyme or reason to why she was doing that. And so after sitting there wondering what they should do, they settled on, well, tomorrow we'll tell the park rangers that she was here and maybe they'll do something about it. And so feeling pretty confident that this woman's not going to come back, they both go back into the tent, they zip it shut, they get in their sleeping bags, and they're about to go to sleep when they hear someone running towards their campsite. And they know it's this woman.
I was adjusting my chair, by the way.
They immediately unzip the tent and they look out, and now the woman's not digging anymore. She's rummaging through some of their stuff that's outside of their tent. And the way she's doing it, they described as monkey-like. She'd pick something up, look at it, and throw it over her head. She'd pick the next thing up.
Well, by the sounds of it, she's acting like a monkey, so the comparison isn't far off.
Throw it over her head, back and forth, just throwing things behind her. And so the boy,
I mean, I throw things over my head sometimes. Actually more like over like my shoulder like that, but don't think I'm a monkey because of that. So she's just looking at things. Not so bad, but still kind of weird, pretty weird.
And he shines a light on her and goes, "You need to leave." And she doesn't react. She just keeps flipping through all their stuff until he gets pretty forceful and says, "You need to leave right now." And at that point, she kind of stops and looks at him like, "Huh, what are you doing here? And then she gets up, turns around, and walks away. Now the couple really doesn't know what to do because she's clearly willing to come back.
Get the old bear spray or taser out.
They stayed outside their tent for about 15 more
There's
minutes.
no way I'm repeating this cycle.
Making lots of noise and treating her like she's an animal, and they're just trying to scare her away from the campsite. And after a little bit of time, they thought, okay, there's no way she comes back now because, we were pretty aggressive with her this time and she seemed to really get it. They both do go back in the tent, and as soon as they zip it shut, they hear her come running straight back to the site, like she was literally waiting in the wings for when they went back in the tent.
Of course she's going to wait until they go back in the tent. She knows better.
She's just feverishly digging into the ground as fast as she can. And
she's trying to do a Mr. Beast Buried Alive challenge.
Screaming at this woman to get the F out of here. What are you doing? And this seems to kind of frighten the woman, who gets up and she looks at them like, why are you yelling at me? And she runs away. And it looked almost animalistic the way she was running away, like she was feral. The boy and the girl are totally
That's because she is.
It's about 1:30 in the morning, and this woman just keeps coming back to their site, and they don't know what to do about it. So they turn on some lanterns and they turn on their flashlights, and they decide, we're just going to stay outside until the morning. That way we know she doesn't come back and doesn't steal anything from us. But by about 3:30 in the morning, they've been outside for 2 hours. They're getting cold. They're super tired. The woman's nowhere to be found. And so they finally say, you want to go back in and get some sleep? I think this time she's really gone.
Nope, she isn't. She isn't.
And they go to sleep.
She's just going to come back and bury a hole.
The next morning when they get up and they unzip their tent, they look outside and all of their stuff has been thrown all over the campsite. And the hole in the ground that the woman had dug that was previously about 4 or 6 inches deep is now well over a foot deep. And they realize this woman must have been lurking in the shadows in the woods, watching them from 1:30 to 3:30 in the morning. That whole time they were out there kind of warding her off. She was just waiting, just watching them the whole time in the shadows. And as soon as they went into their tent, she must have given it a little bit of time, but then she ran right back over and she ransacked their site. But the strangest thing was, after they looked through all of the stuff she had chucked around, nothing was missing, and there was some pretty expensive stuff that was laying out.
Oh, that's nice. She didn't steal anything. That's nice of her.
After they picked up their site, they went to the park ranger and they told them about what had happened, but the ranger has no idea what to make of it. He's never heard of such a thing. And so the couple just leaves that day because they're not about to spend another night here. And
well, of course not.
They have no idea why this woman was running onto their site and digging into the ground and rummaging through their stuff. It was like she was just a wild animal.
She is a wild animal.
In 2015, an experienced outdoorsman named Bob, along with his wife, his young daughter, and their 2 German shepherds.
What a name! What kind of name is that? Bob. Such a like goofy name, goofy-eyed name. Bob. That's the name of the minion. And that rapper. That Airplane song was actually quite good, actually. I think he's the only person that's acceptable to be called Bob. Anyone else is just, no.
Decided to go camping in a remote part of northern Oregon. When they arrived at the site, Bob began setting up the big family tent.
Do you know how to get to
sleep in? And his daughter said, hey, do you mind if I sleep in the spare...
Wait, let me try again. Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon? Yep, there we go, I did it.
2-man tent that we always bring with us. Bob and his wife deliberated for a minute, but said, you know what, that's fine, but you gotta bring Guts. That's one of the German shepherds. Guts needs to sleep with you because he's gonna be your protection. So that night, after some s'mores around a campfire, Bob's daughter... Let
me tell you right now, dogs ain't my protection, alright? I'm getting cats. I mean cats, bro. Like, I'm like, if I'm sleeping with the cat, I'm getting cats. I'm getting some very tough cats on steroids. They're gonna protect me. No dogs ain't protecting me, cause those things are werewolves in my mind. In my opinion. In my eyes, that's what I was trying to say.
2-man tent, and Bob, his wife, and Leah, the other dog, retreat to their tent. That night, Bob wakes up suddenly to what sounds like footsteps outside of his tent, and he looks to his side, and his wife is still in the tent with him, and so is Leah, the other dog, and he listens really closely, and he can hear his daughter is snoring, and he can hear the sound of Guts breathing. So his whole family is accounted for, but he still hears these footsteps, and they don't sound like light little scampering sounds like you might expect from a squirrel or some small critter. They sound heavy. like a big creature is roaming around their campsite. But Bob's dogs are really keyed in to protecting their family, and since Guts and Leah are not up going crazy about whatever's out there, he figures, you know what, it's got to be an elk or something, and it's not going to do anything to us, so Bob ultimately just goes back to sleep. The next morning, Bob gets up, and everybody's just fine. There's no sign of any intruders in their campsite, and so that only confirms to him that, yep, it was just some harmless animal kind of walking around the wilderness, because we're in a pretty remote area. That morning, they decide to go for a walk down the road that was right next to their campsite. And so they take the dogs, they start walking, and they make it a couple hundred feet down this road when all of a sudden Guts sees something or hears something and takes off sprinting down the road and turns down this little access road that branches off of the road they're on into the woods. And Bob is thinking, oh no, there's a campsite down there, and this big German Shepherd's gonna bound up on them, and something bad's gonna happen. And so Bob, his heart's racing, he starts taking off after Guts. He goes down the access road, and he finds Guts stopped right outside of a campsite. But there doesn't appear to be anybody in the campsite. But there's a tent, there's a cooler, there's a table, there's all the things you would expect at a campsite, just no people. So Bob runs up and he grabs Guts and he yells out reflexively, hey, I'm really sorry, he's totally harmless, I don't know what he saw, hey, we're leaving. But then before he leaves, he realizes on the tent there's this big scratch through it, like it's been cut open. And curiosity gets the better of him, and so he kind of walks up, keeping an eye out in case he's wrong and there are people.
Don't be curious.
Closer, he realizes there's
just stay away. You know what they say? I should have stayed curious. Wait, no, let me try it again. As TikTok said, I should have stayed curious. So that's what people should do in scary stories. Just stay curious. Don't check anything out. Just run away.
Is abandoned because he's looking around and all of their stuff has just been ransacked. There's scratch marks on everything, like animals have clearly come through here. And Bob, who is an avid outdoorsman, he knows how much some of their equipment cost. And he's thinking, why would anyone abandon this really expensive tent or this really expensive cooler? And as he's thinking about that, he turns and he sees there's a propane tank, a solid metal propane tank.
Propane nightmares, anyone?
Completely flattened.
Pendulum?
But there's no tree that's fallen nearby. There's no source. There's no way that could have been flattened. So he's definitely unsettled by this, but ultimately he decides, you know what? I'm going to take my family, go back to my campsite. I'll just call the park rangers. They can come down here and they can figure out what this is. Later that afternoon, Bob and his family are back at their campsite just a couple hundred feet away from this abandoned campsite. And at one point, his wife gets up to go use the bathroom. She walks about 70 feet away behind a tree and she squats down. And then all of a sudden, she gets up and starts running back towards camp. And Bob sees this. He turns and sees her running towards him. At the same time, Guts gets up and starts sprinting towards her. And so Bob's thinking, what the heck is going on? Bob
she saw something.
His daughter and says, stay right here with Leah. And Bob gets up and starts running towards his wife. And Guts, at this point, has run to his wife.
Bob, how intimidating.
Guts has run way into the woods. And as Bob is running up to his wife, he's like, what's going on? Why are you running? What's going on? And she says, I don't know. I just had this horrible feeling someone was watching me. And when I turned, I already saw Guts running towards me and it scared me. And so that's why I'm here. And he's like, look, go with our daughter and with Leah. I'm going to see what's going on. And so his wife leaves and Bob draws his pistol and he starts walking out towards where Guts has now stopped. Hair raised, growling, it's yapping and barking at something in front of it. And Bob's looking and he can't see anything. And finally, after not being able to figure out what the heck is going on, he just takes Guts and goes back to his campsite. When Bob got back to his campsite, he wanted to leave. And his wife wanted to leave. His daughter didn't really know what was going on, but the attitude was, we want to leave. However, it was getting late and they had a bunch of stuff they would need to pack up. And it was going to be a real ordeal trying to do that, especially without any light. So they decide, okay, we'll stay one more day and we're going to leave first thing in the morning. In Bob's head, he's thinking, okay, I heard weird footsteps outside. You know, we have this abandoned campsite nearby that's been thrashed up in the flattened propane tank. And now my wife is running away from something and Guts is seeing strange things in the woods. Like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And he decides he's going to set up a tripwire all the way around his campsite using a rope tied at about 8 inches off the ground. Where
that's smart.
Tripwire. Pieces of metal that would clang together. So if anything touched the rope, it would make the metallic clinking sound. Then it would
monster energy.
Someone's here. And so Bob.
I'm more of a prime guy myself. You know, I'm more of a prime person. Oh, and I like Feastables also. I like Feastables with Prime, Mr. Beast chocolate. I know not everyone, it's very controversial, I know not everyone likes it, but I love it.
Edge of the site.
Milk chocolate's best flavor.
Obvious starting point for this tripwire, and he bends down to tie the rope, and he realizes, oh my god, someone's already done this. There is another tripwire that's already been built around the outside of our campsite. It's just been cut, it's been broken. Like, it doesn't work, but it's here. Someone else who was at this campsite felt concerned enough about whatever was in the woods that they already had this idea. Bob didn't even tie his perimeter. He just drew his gun, told his family, get in the truck, and he stayed up all night protecting his family in the truck. As soon as the sun came up, they packed up and they got the heck out of there. Bob is convinced that there is something out there in the woods in northern Oregon that was walking around their campsite at night, that's scaring their dogs, that's stalking them basically and watching them from a distance. And probably whatever is out in the woods is the same thing that caused the previous group to set up their own tripwire. And it's also probably the reason the other campers at the other campsite were willing to abandon their nice equipment to get the heck out of there, because they are not messing with whatever the heck is out in those woods.
The witch. I have plenty of those. I have plenty of those in my school, so this shouldn't be so terrifying for me. Yeah, actually, there's this one witch. Her name begins with a J. That's all I'll say. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say. She's a witch. That's all I'm gonna say.
In 2004, wildland firefighters were called into a forest in central Idaho to combat an emerging fire. By the time the crew arrived at this forest, it was clear this fire was spreading a lot faster than they anticipated. As a result, Mike, who was the assistant superintendent, basically the second in command of this particular crew, he said he was going to hop on the ATV and drive off way ahead of them to see if they needed to spread out farther to stop this fire. So Mike hops on an ATV and he takes off down this ancient looking logging road that probably hasn't seen a vehicle or a person in decades. Mike had made it about a half mile down this trail when he noticed out of the corner of his eye a bobcat was running perpendicular to him straight out of the forest as if it was going to cross the road about 100 feet in front of him. Mike comes to a stop and thinks, this bobcat doesn't know I'm here. It probably is not used to seeing people. It's going to come out into this trail, see me, get spooked, and run away. But instead, this bobcat runs directly into the middle of the road, turns, and faces Mike in a very aggressive posture. Mike is shocked at what he's seeing because he knows bobcats are notoriously elusive and they're nocturnal. So for this thing to be out in the daytime and to be intentionally blocking his path and standing there aggressively like it's going to attack him was so out of the ordinary. So the two of them are just looking at each other, not moving for about 10 seconds until this bobcat opens its mouth and then begins screaming like a person. It did not seem like the right sound for what he...
Bobcat screaming like a person? What is this, a glitch in the Matrix or something? Is this like a glitch in the Matrix story? Is it like on like r/glitch in the Matrix story? Like, is this like something on Reddit maybe? I don't know. But let's keep watching, we'll find out.
He was looking at. He said more than scary, it was just intensely weird. And just as quickly as this bobcat has arrived, it stops screaming, turns and runs to a tree, sprints up the tree and climbs onto this branch that happens to be perched right over the trail he's on. And Mike's looking up at this bobcat that's right over this trail, and he knows if I'm going to continue going down this trail, I have to go under this screaming...
Oh, that's a cute bobcat. That's a cute bobcat. Pat, pat, pat.
Bobcat. Although totally freaked out, he knew he needed to keep going down this trail, and he's thinking to himself, you know what, this bobcat is probably just scared of me, and that was its reaction, as bizarre as it was. And so he throws his ATV in gear, and he starts slowly moving down the trail, the whole time keeping his eye on the bobcat, making sure it doesn't show any sign like it's going to leap off onto him. And as he got closer and closer, he just gunned it and sped underneath the branch, and luckily it didn't jump down on him. And as he got a little bit farther away, he turned up to look, and the bobcat had turned around and was still watching him very intently sitting on this branch. Mike makes it about another half mile down the road before he sees something else that's very strange. He sees a cabin. It's this little tiny cabin that's tucked away in the woods, and he's thinking to himself, I'm on federal land. There aren't supposed to be any private structures here. And he figures, even if this is illegal, I do need to stop and make sure no one's in there because there's this huge fire coming this way. And so he parks his ATV and he starts walking off the trail.
So is this like
cabin. And
a forest with like weird occurrences going on or something? I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. I want to know what's going on.
Tell it's not only a very old cabin, but it's almost certainly abandoned because he can see all these slats that have been put over all of the windows like it's been boarded up. But when he got up close, he noticed something strange. The door itself into this cabin was not boarded up, and the doorknob was missing, and in its place was this shiny silver chain link that was thread through the opening where there should have been a doorknob around a wooden post that was right outside the door. Basically a makeshift lock because there was no doorknob to it. And he's thinking how weird it is that in the middle of this forest on an old ancient logging road that clearly no one goes down, where bobcats are running around freely, that there would be this new chain here, which indicates someone must have been here recently. And so he bends down to look through the space that was still there from where the doorknob should have been, and he looks inside and he can't really see anything. And so he takes his flashlight and he shines it in, and he can't believe what he's looking at. There's all this furniture inside this tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere, and it's all upside down. And he's just totally creeped out. So he puts his flashlight away and
upside down,
and he starts walking back towards the road, and he can't help it, but the whole time he's looking over his shoulder back at the cabin like someone's gonna emerge from outside of this cabin. He gets to the road, and by the time he's there, he's running. He jumps on his ATV, he whips it around, and he starts blazing back up the logging road back towards his crew. And when he turns the corner to where that bobcat was, he sees there is now a Native American woman standing in the middle of the path. She's wearing this tattered white nightgown. She's barefoot.
What is this? What kind of forest is this?
Bobcat. And she's looking at him as if she's expecting him, like she's been tipped off that he's going to be here. And he stops about 100 feet away from her, and now he's officially freaked out. He's still looking over his shoulder towards that cabin because now everything is just totally weird.
Maybe that was her cabin.
Before
maybe
he has a chance to do anything, this woman lets out a scream, a blood-curdling scream that is identical to the bobcat's.
Yeah, look, yeah. See, look.
Unnerved by this.
I was gonna say she was gonna have a bobcat scream, was it? I predicted that, and then he said it first. He took the words right out of my mouth. I said that she was gonna have, I predicted that she was gonna have a bobcat scream. He took the words right out of my mouth. I knew it. I just knew it.
About this day has really gone sideways as this woman is screaming at the top of her lungs, and then suddenly she stops. Mike's still just standing there like, what's going on? And she runs to
the bobcat was Native American
tree the bobcat had climbed earlier, and she climbs up this tree and gets onto the branch where the bobcat was and perches like an animal on the branch looking at Mike. And now, just like the bobcat, Mike is going to have to drive right underneath this woman who is perched over the trail. And so he throws his ATV in gear and he starts driving, and he's staring at this woman, and now her mouth is just open like she's about to scream again. And as soon as he got close, he gunned it and went right underneath her. And he turned around after he got some distance away from her, and she's still on the branch, now turned around facing him as he drives away. He goes back, he tells the crew what he saw, and as much as they all want to go back and see this woman and see this cabin, they know they can't. They got to fight this fire. And so ultimately they do that, and then they leave. A couple of days later, Mike was in a bar in the town right near the forest they had just been in fighting that fire, and Mike had seen the woman in the cabin, and he struck up a conversation with a local. And he said, hey, do you know of any buildings that are in that section of the forest? And the guy kind of laughed, and he was like, you know, the only building I ever heard of out there was apparently some cabin where some crazy lady thought of herself as a witch, and she apparently had a bobcat for a pet. And so we as kids were just told to stay away from there. So besides that, I don't know. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments.
Alright, that is going to be it for that one. I'm just going to find a video. That's why I'm switching to the screen, if you're wondering. Let's see.
It's very simple. Scary stories. But before
Okay, yeah, I think this one looks good.
Today's theme is very simple, scary stories. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a
Oh, wait.
fan of the strange, dark,
Whoops, I forgot to... Alright, there we go. Sorry about that. That was a bit of an
mysterious
error.
delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please eat all of the like button's Oreos except for one and put it back in the pantry, and then also crumple all of their potato chips. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly
That is
uploads.
so evil.
All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2010, an avid caver named Jeff decided to go to Madagascar to explore a natural cave shaft he had discovered.
That's another goofy name, Jeff. That's the name of the creepypasta, Jeff the Killer.
He arrived in country, he got a rental car, and he hired a guide to take him out to the area where he knew this cave was going to be. When he got out to that area, he used his notebook where he had taken notes the last time he was here, and he used that to find the opening to the cave. He paid the guide to stick around at the car while he went down and explored this cave. He assured him it was not going to be for a very long time. The shaft was approximately 50 meters deep and 1 meter across, so it's pretty narrow, and the first 20 meters of the descent are on a bit of an angle, and then the final 30 meters are down at a straight vertical drop. At the bottom of this cave was this opening where you could actually stand up and walk around, but there were no other tunnels to explore at the bottom, so you would just go down, touch the bottom, and go back up. The visibility inside of the shaft was limited because all you had was the light that was coming in, and because of how narrow the opening was, Jeff's body would obscure a lot of the sunlight coming in. So once Jeff got a few meters down into the tunnel, he would rely on his headlamp. So Jeff enters the cave and he makes his way down to the 20-meter mark. So that's where the tunnel goes from being on an angle to being straight. And he's about to make that final descent down that final 30 meters when he notices something out of the corner of his eye. And he focuses his light on the side of the shaft and he sees thousands of black widow spiders trying to escape the light. They're scattering all over the walls. And he looks around him and he realizes
I'm not scared of spiders, so this story doesn't bother me.
The vertical section of the shaft is covered in black widow spiders. As much as Jeff wanted to stop right there and go...
Hey, look, spiders are part of the Bloods. They're part of the Bloods. But what about the Crips spiders? I'm a part of the Crips. I got a blue mask.
To the surface, he couldn't. In order to go back up this line that he was rappelling down on, he needed technical gear. And his technical gear was packed in his backpack, and it would just be totally unsafe trying to fish it out of his bag. And so he would have to descend...
Yes, it is all sounding good. Yes. So, yeah, actually, I don't know. I didn't really know what to say.
Final 30 meters to the bottom, then take his pack off, get the gear out, and go back up. So Jeff took a deep breath, and he began his slow, awful descent into this cave filled with spiders. And periodically, as he would bump into the wall, he'd hear them scatter all over the walls, and then he saw them climbing on his sleeves, and he'd have to brush them off his sleeves. He saw them on the rope, he's trying to brush them off. He finally gets to the bottom, and he can hear the spiders on the wall just crawling all over the place. He takes his bag off, and it's covered in spiders. He opens it up, spiders crawl out of his bag. He carefully
how'd they get in the bag? How'd they do that? Did they just crawl through the bag? Well, how that happen?
Back up, and the whole time he's just brushing spiders off of him. Once he gets to the surface, the first thing he does is he strips all of his clothing off to get all the spiders off of his clothing. He takes his bag, dumps it out.
Nah, screw that. The spiders are my friend. At that point, the spiders are my best friends. The spiders are staying. It's their new home. I would rather, and so what if they bite me? So what if I die? I'd rather die with dignity than without. ParrotToucan 2025.
More spiders are in there. After he finally brushes all the spiders off, he redresses and gets in the car. And you can only imagine what the guide was thinking as he's watching this guy, this foreigner, taking his clothes off after being in this cave. But luckily, he doesn't get bit. He gets in the car with the guide, and they start heading back towards the city. As they're driving, he takes his notebook out, and he scratches off the title he had given this cave from the last time he was here, which was the Crooked Tube. He scratches that out, and on top of it, he writes, "The Entrance to Hell." In 2006, a 14-year-old boy named Evan lived on a farm in North Carolina. This was not a typical farm with animals and crops. It was a pine tree harvestry. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and Evan and his family made their living baling pine straw every year. As such, their main living house on the farm was situated right in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined up pine trees. They did not have any neighbors nearby, and there was only one road that led into the property, which from the main house, they could look out and basically see through the rows of trees all the way to the beginning of this road, which meant any visitors were really easy to spot. The main house was built on a very slight hill, which meant one side of the house was effectively built on stilts to compensate for the angle. And on that side of the house, on the first floor, was the living room. So anyone who was in the living room looking out the window, they'd basically need to look at a downward angle to see the ground. It would actually seem like you were on the second floor, but really you're on the first floor. The window in the living room was very unique. It stretched almost the entire length of the room, so almost 50 feet across. And at night, you could see animals darting between the different trees because you could see down the rows. And so that was pretty creepy. And then just the fact that this window is so big, if you're in the living room at night, you just felt really exposed. So between the creepy animals running around and the level of exposure and vulnerability, people basically avoided the living room anytime they were in the house at night. That winter, Evan's cousin came to stay with him on his farm, and because the main house did not have any extra bedrooms, Evan and his cousin would have to sleep in the living room. There were two couches inside of the living room, one that was right underneath the 50-foot long window, and then another which was on the other side of the room against a wall that did not have a window. And so Evan would be sleeping on the couch right under the window, and his cousin would be sleeping on the other couch. The first night Evan's cousin was there, they put this big sheet up over the window, but it only blocked like 75% of the window. The two flanks of the window were still exposed, but where the couches were lined up, they were kind of blocked by this sheet, so it gave them a little bit of privacy. After goofing around for a while, the boys finally fell asleep around midnight, and then they woke up a couple hours later because they heard Evan's dogs barking way off in the pine trees. Now, Evan was used to his dogs running around the property and barking at other smaller animals, and so just them barking was not necessarily a red flag. But the barking persisted to the point where Evan's cousin got up off the couch, moved across the room to the opening of the window that was not covered by the sheet at the foot of where Evan was sleeping. Now, Evan was still laying on the couch. He was not going to get up and look out the window, so he's looking down at his cousin, kind of looking at his face to get some sort of a read on what he's seeing. And he notices his cousin has this really perplexed look on his face, like he's squinting his eyes and trying to make sense of what he's looking at. And so Evan looks at him and says, "Hey, what's going on? What do you see?" And his cousin's like, "I don't know if my mind's playing tricks on me or not, but I'm pretty sure I see people out there." At this, Evan jumps off the couch and runs over and butts up right next to his cousin so he can look out the window too. And he's scanning out amongst the rows of trees because there's just a mile of pine trees. And the first thing he notices is the moon is very bright that night. So there's good illumination, and there was a light snow covering on the ground, which really added to the illumination. He's looking out maybe 100 meters when he sees someone's leg extend from behind one of the pine trees as if they're stepping into the space between a pine tree column. And he's staring at it, and he can't believe he's even seeing anyone walking around this area because he didn't see anybody come in on the road, and they have no neighbors. And so he's looking, and then a body follows the leg. A person walks from one row to the next.
Well, yeah, it's a
This tall,
person. It's
dark
not really a
figure
ghost.
just
They're not
walks
real.
calm as can be between the two pine trees. And Evan just grabs his cousin, and he's like, "Did you just see that?" And his cousin's like, "Yeah, I saw that." And so they continue to look in the direction of where this person crossed the path. And after a couple of minutes, they see another leg now emerging, going the other way, back towards where that first person had come from. So the leg kind of extends into this gap, and then this tall figure walks across into the next row, except now, instead of going just directly across, it looks like they're moving at an angle closer to the main house property. The boys look at each other and they don't know what to do.
They're going to come
So they
towards
just
the
keep
house.
looking out the
That's what
window
they're there
in
for.
Stunned silence. And as they're looking, they see this person emerge again, except now
As Calvin Harris said, this is what you came for. That's what they're there for.
they're not 100 meters away. They're like 20 meters away. They don't know how they were able to move that quickly without being seen. And this time when the leg comes out from behind the pine tree, instead of walking across the gap, it stops right in the middle, and it turns and it looks directly at the boys in the window and then begins running toward them. The boys practically fall over trying to get away from the window. Evan's yelling for his father upstairs, and the boys instinctively just start running around the house, locking every door, shutting every window. And as they're going from door to door, the anxiety is growing and growing because they think, if I don't get there fast enough, this person who was running towards the property is going to come barging through that door. And so at every door, their anxiety is through the roof, but they manage to shut everything. Everything is locked right as Evan's father comes charging down the stairs. He's got his gun in hand and he's like, what's going on? And they say, there's someone out in our property. Their dad charges out the front door. The front door is not on the same wall as the living room. It's on the side of the house. So once he goes outside, he's going to need to turn to the right to look out in the direction they were describing. He bombs outside, he stays on the porch, and he starts yelling at whoever's out there that if you come over here, I'm going to shoot you, get the F away from here. And then there's silence. And the boys are waiting, they're looking around, they're checking the window. They don't see anything. The dad comes back inside, he shuts and locks the door, and he tells Evan, keep an eye out. If you see him again, you let me know. Evan would reflect on this experience later on and say, you know, we really should have called 911 at that point.
Well, yeah,
kid,
duh. Why didn't they call 911?
That's the way my family did business. We kind of took care of ourselves. And
call
so even though there was a threat
now.
of some stranger who's running at our property, we were not going to call the cops. And so his dad effectively was telling him to be a lookout. And so Evan and his cousin, they go back into the living room.
Oh yeah, they make better police than actual 911. Sure we do.
Out the window and not seeing anything. They're thinking to themselves, you know, Evan's dad's a pretty intimidating guy, and he was just out there screaming and yelling with a gun, threatening to shoot them. So they probably got the message and they're probably gone. And so the boys got back into their couches, and it took them a while, but they did ultimately fall asleep. The next morning when the boys got up, the first thing they wanted to do was go out there and see if they could find footprints from this person to kind of confirm it really was a person, because part of them thought, you know, maybe we didn't see that. Maybe that was our imaginations. They don't know. And so they start by going out the front door, so not on the same wall as the living room. They go out the front door, they turn, and they walk down into the trees. And they're looking around, and they find some footprints. So they're confirming to themselves, okay, there was someone out here. It wasn't us. This is not our footprints. We found them. So they start following the footprints back towards the property. And they realize at some point there are two distinct sets of footprints. There were two people out here. And even worse is they followed them all the way up to the house. And there were two different circles of footprints that stopped right underneath the living room window along the two flanks of the window where the sheet was not covering. Which means over the course of the night, when Evan and his cousin were up at that window looking out, there's a good chance that one or two strangers were tucked up against the side of the house. And they would not have seen them because of the angle out of the living room window. It was steep because of the stilts it was on. And so anybody that was tucked up along the side, they'd be in a blind spot. And then for sure, after Evan and his cousin got back into bed and were sleeping, there were two strangers who were right up against those windows, probably pulling themselves up to look inside. When Evan's father found these footprints, he immediately grabbed his gun and tried to follow them back into the woods to see where they came from, but unfortunately the snow cover wasn't complete, and at some point they lost the tracks and they never figured out who those two people were. Evan would say, following this event, his cousin refused to ever come back over his house for a sleepover.
I'm surprised. No surprise. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to go back after that. I wouldn't want to go back after two guys tried breaking into the house. I wouldn't want to go back. Never, ever, 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 ever. The woman in black. Okay. Hopefully it's not just some woman doing blackface, hopefully.
October of 2005, a 21-year-old named Nathan was back home in Elk Grove, California, visiting his mother at her apartment for a couple of days. Her apartment was part of this really safe complex. It was gated, there's lots of lights and cameras, so anything that went bump in the night was just going to be, you know, your noisy neighbors or something. On the last night of Nathan's stay, he was laying in his bed in the guest room, listening to the hum of the street lamp that was outside, and the crickets and the passing by of cars, when he drifted off to sleep. At about 2 a.m., Nathan woke up, or so he thought. He couldn't move his body, he could only move his eyes.
Sleep paralysis.
And even though he had never experienced
I'm already calling it sleep paralysis.
He instinctively understood this is probably that. He noticed the room was completely silent. There was no more crickets, no more hum of the light outside, no more traffic, just total silence. And then he started flashing his eyes around the room because he couldn't move his head or his body, and he started taking stock of the room. The bed he was in was positioned as far away from the door as he could in the back right corner. From where he was laying, if he looked to his right, in that corner was this big armoire, and then moving left from the armoire as he scanned the room,
oh,
he
that,
came to the door, which is on the opposite side of where his bed was, and then if he kept scanning left, he would reach the foot of his bed, and just beyond the foot of his bed was a table and a chair. But because he was laying flat, he couldn't really look down and actually see the table and chair. And so with all of his strength, he managed to raise his head just enough that he had a line of sight to that section of his room, the only section he has not looked at yet. And he sees the table and chair. And he sees in the corner is this dark figure that's standing there looking at him.
Yep, sleep paralysis.
He's completely frozen with fear. His thought is, there's an intruder in the house. How did they get in here? What are they doing in here? And he managed to keep his head just long enough to get a decent look at this dark figure. And he determined it was most likely a woman with a shawl covering her face. And before his head fell back to the pillow, he saw her suddenly crouch down on the ground out of view. And then Nathan's head fell back. And now he knows there's just some stranger in his room, and he can't lift his head up anymore, and he's looking around with his eyes. He sees the armoire, he sees the door, he can't see that table and chair, and then he hears the sound of someone slithering along the ground out of view, and he can hear her breathing as she's getting closer and closer to the edge of the bed. And he's laying there terrified. He's so scared he can't even make a sound, and he's telling himself, this has to be a dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up. And he's laying there, and this woman, she stands up and she leans out over his bed and she looks at him, and her face is pale and her eyes are sunk way back in her head. And then she begins to slowly crawl on top of him, and Nathan's sitting here looking at this woman. He wants to close his eyes, but he can't. And he just feels his chest being pressed down. He can hear the sounds of the springs compressing all around him as this woman positions herself on his chest.
Nope,
and then he
this is 100
scream, and then suddenly he's awake.
Nope.
He sits up and he's looking around. There's nobody in his room. The familiar hum of the light and the crickets and the traffic outside, they all return. And his mom comes running in the room, and she's like, hey, are you okay? I heard screaming in here. And he said, oh, no, I had a bad dream. I'm fine now. I had a terrible dream, but I'm fine now. And his mom's like, okay, all right, you need anything? And he's like, nope. So she comes over, she gives him a hug and a kiss. She goes back to bed, and he would go downstairs, flip on a Disney movie, actually Aladdin, and he would fall asleep with a Disney movie on and with lights on. And there was no more sleep paralysis that night. The next day, Nathan got up and he headed back to his house, and he couldn't shake the experience. He had never had sleep paralysis before, but it was just so much more terrifying than he ever would have imagined. And he's just thinking to himself, I can't believe there are people that put up with this on any sort of regular basis. But, you know, after a couple of days and
the tip is you gotta close your eyes before the things set in so you don't hallucinate anything. Gotta close your eyes, or like at least look at something that you can't see nothing, like something that blocks your view, or like something that can't be in front of you. That's what you gotta do. Those are like the 2 tips for what you gotta do.
And not experiencing any sleep paralysis. You know, time went on and he just kind of forgot about it.
I just saw that loading symbol. It gives me PTSD from the stream my internet went bad.
Later, in March of 2006, Nathan is at this big family party in Chico, California. Big outdoor barbecue, all of his family's there, and at some point his sister shows up. His sister was not supposed to be attending this party, so it was a great surprise. He hasn't seen her in a while, and he immediately pulls her aside to catch up with her. And so for the first hour of their conversation, they're just chatting about their lives and what they're up to. Towards the end of their conversation, Nathan suddenly felt compelled to share his sleep paralysis experience with his sister. And the reason he wanted to was because he knew that she knew that he was actually a skeptic. And so she would believe him. If he's telling her this is what happened, she would believe that that's what he saw. And so he starts by saying, you know, I had the weirdest experience at Mom's apartment just a couple of months ago. I'm pretty sure it was sleep paralysis. And his sister immediately butts in and she goes, wait a minute. I had sleep paralysis for the first time in my life 2 weeks ago at Mom's apartment. It was horrible. I was in the guest room, and then I saw this woman, and she was like standing over me.
They had shared sleep paralysis. It was
horrible. That's exactly what happened to me. I was laying in the guest room, and I couldn't move, and then I saw a woman in the corner, and she stood on my chest. They proceeded to go over all the details of each of their stories, and they discovered that they had had almost the exact same experience. And at the end of it, they wanted to have a rational explanation for how they both could just somehow have their only sleep paralysis experience in the same room in roughly the same timeline and experience the exact same events. They were trying to, you know, come up with a rational explanation for that. but it was just too much of a coincidence. But ultimately, neither of them were really prepared to start discussing what else it could be. So they decided to just kind of laugh it off and say, man, that's pretty weird, and they moved on. After the party was over, Nathan would go back to his house and he would tell his wife about this crazy coincidence he and his sister had, and his wife would say, yeah, that's wild. But after that, Nathan just did not want to think about it or talk about it, and so he kind of just, pushed it out of his mental space and did forget about it. He moved on. 5 months later, in August of 2006, Nathan's mom would move out of that apartment building and she would move into a 2-story house still in Elk Grove, California. Shortly after she moved in, she asked Nathan if he would come spend a couple nights with her, and Nathan said sure. In order to better understand what happens to Nathan over the course of his stay at his mother's new house, you need to understand a basic layout of her house. So when you walk
God, that's how you know it's bad. When he starts explaining the layout of a house or an apartment, that's how you know it's about to go down. That's how you know it's going to go bad. That's how you know it's going to be scary.
Through her double doors, to your left is going to be a formal living room. In the center of the house is a hallway that shoots straight back to the kitchen. And then to your right when you walk in, there's a wall, and on that wall is the stairs leading up to the second floor. If you take those stairs to the second floor, you reach a landing where there's a window that looks back into the backyard, and immediately to your right, there is a single door, and that's the master bedroom where Nathan's mom would sleep. From the landing, if you turned left, there'd be another door that's a mirror image of the master bedroom door, and this
so I assume he's gonna have sleep paralysis in this place too. I guess it's like his mom's cursed or something.
That's irrelevant to the story. If you went inside the guest room, the bed was located in the back right corner, so the same layout as the guest room in the apartment building, where the person laying in the bed, so Nathan, his feet would be closest to the door. And from Nathan's perspective in the bed, the only other piece of furniture in this new house guest room was a table.
Although if he has cheese feet, it might save him.
Right-hand wall,
but everyone knows that you tuck your feet under the covers so no monster gets it. That is what you do. That is the protocol for what you do when you go to bed.
And on the table was a TV. So that's the only things in the room. The first night Nathan was at this new house was totally uneventful. The second night, not so much. He was up in the guest room, laying on the bed, watching TV. The lights are off, it's just the TV on, and at some point, he dozes off. He wakes up a short time later, and he can't move. It's the same sensation he had when he was staying with his mom at her apartment. And he begins to panic because the last time he felt this way, a strange veiled woman stood on his chest and made it feel like he was dying. And so immediately, he's trying to move his body, he can't, and so using his eyes, he starts looking around the room, praying this woman is not in the room with him. And so he looks to the right, to that corner, which you can see, there's no one there. From this corner, he starts scanning across the room. He sees the TV, it's still on. He keeps scanning and he sees the door and it's open. And then he scans and he's able to just barely make out the space at the foot of the bed. He can actually see to the corner, and this woman, she's not in here. And so initially he feels incredibly relieved that she's not in the room with him. But then he finds himself focusing on the open door into the dark hallway. And he's thinking to himself, please do not come walking through that door. And so he stares at the open door,
is going to walk
just
through the door.
hoping he breaks out of the sleep paralysis when he notices something about the TV. It's flickering. And so he averts his gaze to the TV and he realizes what he's looking at on TV does not look familiar. It does not look like a TV show. It looks like CCTV camera footage. Like it looks like a security camera footage. And he realizes the footage he's looking at is the inside of his mother's kitchen downstairs. He recognized the way it was laid out. That's his mother's house. That's downstairs. And he's staring at the footage thinking, why is this footage playing on the TV? And I don't think there's a camera down there. When he notices on the camera, the woman with the veil walks into the middle of the frame. And she looks up at the camera right as the camera turns off.
Now, this is some next level sleep paralysis. Like, what is this?
The hallway is dark. And he's left paralyzed knowing this woman is downstairs in the kitchen. And as he's laying there, he hears her start running through the house. And it sounds like an animal is barreling into things as she's running through the bottom floor. And she stops at the foot of the stairs. And he's thinking to himself, I know where she's going. She's coming up to my room. And so as he's laying there, he feels his heart racing and he's staring at the open door. He knows she's going to come flying up those stairs and she's going to come through that door. And instead of running up the stairs, he hears her take 1 step, 2 steps. And as she's making her way up the stairs, he's just thinking,
more intimidating.
please break out of this trance, stop this paralysis, wake up, wake up. and then he sees her head emerge, and she turns to look at him from the stairs into the room. And once she sees it's him, she bolts around and starts charging into the room on all fours like an animal. At this point, Nathan lets out a primal scream. He is scared for his life as this woman is charging towards him, and she stops dead in her tracks right in the middle of the room.
999 trillion notes.
And then it's silent. As soon as she was downstairs, Nathan could sit up. Except it did not feel like the first time he had sleep paralysis at his mom's apartment, when he sat up and he had the sensation of relief. You've woken up. You were asleep before. Now you're awake. This time, it was like he was always awake, but now he can sit up. He did not have a sense of relief. In fact, he was worried she was still in the house. And as he's sitting up in bed, his mother comes running into the room. She looks disheveled. She's half asleep. And she's like, was that you? Were you running around the house? I could have sworn I heard someone running around the house. Was that you?
Ooh, did she have sleep paralysis also?
Process what he's been through, whether that was real, whether it was a dream, and he's trying to find the words to describe to his mom the dream he had, but like he can't process what's happening, and he just says, "Mom, we have to check the house. We have to make sure no one's in the house." And so the two of them flip on every light upstairs. They're not even talking.
Alright, what you staring at me for, bro? What you trying to get into?
They turn on all the lights upstairs. Nathan leads the way down, and they're flicking on all the lights, and they manage to search the whole house, and there's no sign of a break-in. There's no one in their house. After the coast was clear, and they felt like they were not in immediate danger, they went into the kitchen to kind of talk about what just happened. And so Nathan's like, okay, Mom, I just got to tell you everything that I'm thinking right now. I can't really process what just happened. I think it was a bad dream, but I'm starting to think that it could be something else, or I'm just losing my mind. So a few months ago, I was sleeping in your guest room in your apartment, and I had an experience that I'm almost positive was sleep paralysis. You know, I was laying there, I couldn't move, and this figure was in the room, and they were standing on me. It was terrifying, but it sounded an awful lot like sleep paralysis. But then a couple months after that, I talked to my sister, and I told her about it, and she told me that very recently, right before you moved into this house actually, she was in that room and she also had basically the exact same experience. She had never had sleep paralysis before. I had never had sleep paralysis before. So we
is it like, do they have like some sort of anxiety or something? I'm not sure. Like, there's got to be a cause for this, right?
I had another sleep paralysis experience with the same woman who's running around the house, and you just said you heard her running around the house. His mom looked really concerned, but she wasn't shocked. She says to Nathan, I have seen this woman. I saw her in my apartment way long time ago, but I remember what you're describing. That's the experience I had. This woman, you know, showed up in the room and she stood on me, and it scared the heck out of me, but I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was sleep paralysis. And so Nathan and his mom proceeded to spend the next several hours just talking through what this could be. How could they, all three of them, you know, him, his mom, and his sister, how could all of them have had the exact same experience? And how could tonight,
runs in the family,
Nathan had this experience, how could his mom have heard those footsteps if that was indeed sleep paralysis? Because it wasn't Nathan, he was in the bedroom. And it wasn't his mom, she was in her bedroom. And she didn't have any pets, so who could it be? Nathan says he and his family are still totally rattled by this experience, and they don't have an answer. And this is a family of skeptics, so they're not looking for a reason to call this paranormal. They simply don't have the answers. Nathan has said that he, his mom, and his sister have not had any further experiences with the woman in black ever since that last experience Nathan had, and they're just hoping it stays that way. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found these secret...
Alright, that is going to be it for that video. I'm just going to switch to that screen, try and find another one. Intermission, guys, intermission. Actually, wait, no, I should do it the other way.
In today's top story, we're reminded why truth is often stranger than fiction. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer the like button up here and then give them an O'Douls. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
First floor.
In the spring of 2013, a young woman named Melissa finally moved out of her mother's house and got her own place across town. For the first few months she was living there, she never noticed anything strange. But about 3 months into living there, things started to get a little bit weird. It started with a whole bunch of hang-up calls where someone from different numbers would call, she'd answer, and she could hear them breathing, but they weren't saying anything. And then she started getting these huge bouquets of flowers delivered to her front step, but they were delivered
looks like
from
as a stalker.
anonymous. Then after that, she started noticing things in her kitchen and her living room were going missing. Things like plates, cups, drink coasters, salt shakers, forks and knives, little things, but since she lived alone and she was the only one moving these things, they really stood out. Melissa had this habit that every time she went to bed, she would unplug her TV. She had this irrational fear if she didn't do that, that it would spark a fire and her house would burn down in the middle of the night. So she was pretty obsessive compulsive about always making sure the TV was unplugged before she went upstairs to bed. And so
well, that's a lie. How thing could burn down just because the TV's still plugged in. What's people with these dumb compulsive things? What the hell is this?
She unplugs her TV and she goes up to bed. The next morning she gets up and comes downstairs and the TV's plugged in again. She convinces herself that, well, she must have forgot to unplug the TV. As rare of an event as that is, it has to be what happened. And so that night she unplugs the TV and remembers looking directly at the plug, confirming that, yes, I've unplugged the TV. And then she puts it down and looks again at the outlet. It's not plugged in. It's definitely not plugged in. And then she goes upstairs to bed. The next morning when she walks downstairs, she had the sense of dread that when she turned the corner, because her TV was right at the bottom of the stairs, that when she turned the corner, it would be plugged in again, and her worst nightmare would come true, that something is happening on my first floor when I'm asleep at night. And as she comes down the stairs and turns the corner, what does she see? The TV is plugged in again. She's horrified, but has no idea what to do. It's not some malicious act. And she's telling herself, well, maybe I forgot again. But then she's like, no, I remember last night staring at the plug. I definitely unplugged it. And so she flies around her first floor to make sure, 1, everything is locked, but 2, no one else is in here. And when she's satisfied that, yup, it's empty down here, and 2, everything is locked, she sits there thinking, well, now what do I do? Do I call the police and say, someone's plugging in my TV? You know, she can't do anything. And it was at this point that Melissa developed a very real fear of her first floor. And she began going to bed so early at night because she could not be on that floor when it started to get dark. And so imagine living alone, being afraid of going down to your first floor, how scary it would be at night when you're laying in bed, your door's shut, and any noise you hear in the house, you're going to attribute to your first floor. And so Melissa was living this absolutely wretched life where she's scared of everything outside of her bedroom. And so with that as context, Melissa goes to bed one night super early, probably like 3 o'clock. The sun's not even down yet, but she's upstairs. But eventually it does get dark outside and she still has not fallen asleep. And so she sits up in bed and she turns on the TV. And right away, the channels on the screen start to change. And she's thinking, oh, I must be laying on the remote. But then she remembers the remote's in my hand. And so she's looking at the remote, and then she's looking at the TV. She's not touching her
Someone's
remote.
doing that.
And the channels are still cycling. Now, Melissa had what's called a skybox, which means her downstairs TV was connected to her upstairs TV and vice versa.
What the hell was
if
that?
one was changing the channel, in
was
real time, the other changed the channel. And so as she's looking at her remote and not touching it, and looking at the screen as the channels are changing, it dawns on her that someone downstairs is changing the channels. And so frozen in fear, all she can think to do is turn off her TV because that's the one function that does not have any impact on the other TV. So she turns the TV off. And so in total darkness, in a house she's already terrified of, she is straining her ears to try to hear some sign that this is either something, someone's down there, flipping through channels,
is down there,
or this is nothing, and I just happened to turn the TV on when the skybox was malfunctioning. And as she's sitting there, all she can hear is her own breathing, and she can feel the pounding of her heart in her chest. But she doesn't hear any sounds in her house. She doesn't hear the TV on. She doesn't hear footsteps, doors opening, none of that. It's silence in the house. So after what probably felt like an eternity, she just grabbed a pillow and clutched it in front of her and put her head into the pillow and just laid like that until she eventually fell asleep. The next morning when she gets up, the sun is out, and it's this huge relief because suddenly, with the sunlight pouring in the windows, it was like the house wasn't scary anymore. And she's telling herself, you know what, that had to have been just some anomaly with the skybox. I bet I go downstairs and the TV's unplugged. And so she goes downstairs and the TV is unplugged. And so that for her kind of confirms that, okay, the paranoia is getting to me. I'm losing my mind a little bit. I gotta tell someone what's going on. And so as it happens, that day she was going to a family birthday party. And so when she gets there, she pulls her older brother aside and says, here's the strange things that are happening in my house with the skybox and all this. And at first, he looked at her like, really? This is what's going on? You've seen ghosts in your house? But when she really focused on the specific things that were happening, like the plug going back into the wall 2 separate times, and then the...
Alright, that is going to be it for the stream. Subscribe, like, comment, turn notification bells on. Hope you guys have a good rest of the week. And yeah, see you next stream. See ya.